Very big news that I want to couch in some factual realities. Joe Biden yesterday signed an executive order directing the Justice Department to end its use of private prisons. Joe Biden yesterday telling the Justice Department, end the reliance on private prisons, acknowledge the central role that the federal government has played in implementing discriminatory housing policies. And Joe Biden made some remarks before signing these orders, saying that the U.S. government needs a completely new approach to the issue of racial equity. He said the country is less prosperous, less secure because of systemic racism, saying we must change now. It will take time, but we can do it. And Biden called on the Justice Department to curb the use of private prisons right away. Now, I think that this is very important. We've talked before about private prisons versus public prisons, but there are a couple caveats here. And I want to be really clear. I'm not raining on Joe Biden's parade, but what I want people to understand is the reality of the numbers. First of all, in the United States, most inmates are held in state facilities, not federal facilities. So in general, when we're talking about federal prisons, it's a slice, a relatively small one, of all inmates, generally speaking. If you look only at private prisons, most private prison inmates are in state private prisons. And in fact, just a few years ago, if you look at all inmates in private prisons, 78% of them are in state private prisons. Only 22% of private prison inmates are in federal private prisons. So the vast majority of inmates and the vast majority of private prison inmates are state inmates who would not be in any way directly affected by what Joe Biden is saying. Now, that being said, it is still very important that Joe Biden is doing this. Number one, the Bureau of Prisons, Federal Bureau of Prisons, recently opted not to renew some private prison contracts in the recent months, as the number of inmates has been dwindling and many were released to home confinement because of the coronavirus pandemic. This is the perfect time to say, let's keep going in that direction. And furthermore, there's no doubt that there are many states that will take the lead from the federal government when the federal government says at the federal level for federal inmates, we are going to get away from private prisons. Certainly, at least the more blue states and maybe purple states would see that as a signal, as the door opening for them to do the exact same thing. So I do think that this is extraordinarily important. Going forward, there's another issue that follows this, which is that there are many private prisons that have occupancy minimums where essentially they have a contract with the state or federal government. It's mostly state, but there's state and federal, where they say, OK, we will run this prison for you, but you need to guarantee us a certain occupancy rate. If you drop below that occupancy rate, you still have to pay us as if we were that full. And what that generates is a perverse incentive to lower the bar at which you lock people up. If we have a 92% occupancy requirement with this prison, but really we're only using 85%, there's money we're paying as if we were locking people up, even though there's nobody locked up. Let's find some people to lock up so we get our so-called money's worth from these contracts. It's completely perverse. It could not be a more backward system. So this is a great first step. We're on day 7. Yesterday was day 6 for Joe Biden, or I guess the start of day 7 yesterday for Joe Biden. This is a great start. There's no question about it. But if we really want to permanently reduce incarceration, it's not just about doing away with the contracts with private prisons. We also need to change the approach as to who do we even try to who do prosecutors even ask for prison time for? That's obviously a much bigger issue, and it's one that we've talked about before and will continue to talk about. But I agree completely with Joe Biden in doing this. Let's hope some states follow suit, and let's hope we actually deal with, there is a trickle down effect here, which is what kind of policing do we do? Who gets arrested for what crimes? Who gets charged? What penalties and sentences are requested? All of that stuff runs downhill, so to speak, and ends up with what number of people do we have in prisons and what level of demand do we have for bunks or cells, I guess is what we would call them. And you've got to start at the top and allow those changes to trickle down. Joe Biden here sort of starting towards the bottom, but that's okay. And hopefully he will do much more. We'll have more about this on our Instagram page. Find us on Instagram at David Pakman Show.